Welcome. I'm Riley Karsh.
I'm Tova Kopan.
We are thrilled to bring you the We Go Boldly podcast.
Let's talk big burning questions, life changes, and maybe a bit of personal business.
Let's be bold and brave together. Are you ready?
I am. Here comes the show.
Hello and welcome to We Go Boldly, the podcast. We are very excited to be back recording, back to doing new episodes. It's overwhelming, and I sat down and I was like, oh no, I don't remember how to do this. So bear with us through this first episode of season 9. Season 9, that's crazy. Before we dive into what season 9 is going to be all about and what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to say hello to my fantastical, wonderful, amazing partner in so many things and co-host, Tova. In case you didn't realize, I'm Riley. How are you today, Tova? What's happening? We have some updates.
That is a good question. It is not one that I know how to answer ever anymore.
Right.
I will say, let's see. Today, my kids all got to school on time.
Woohoo!
I got a little bit of a walk-in. A boy brought me coffee, and you know how I feel about warm beverages.
I do.
So, I would say in that sense, today has been really good.
Yeah.
Really good. On a bigger sense, many of you know this, although I guess we haven't talked about it on our social media yet. Interesting.
No, we haven't talked about it at all. So the only people who know are friends.
Yeah. So, I mean, Riley had vertigo last week, which was one of our health concerns, which is no joke and totally sucks and is dizziness and is awful.
Yeah.
But before Riley had vertigo, so over the summer, maybe not since we last recorded, but about the same time we were recording, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So it was a whirlwind of a summer. It went from getting my regular annual mammogram, which if you haven't done and you are above the age of 40, you should do. And if you have a high risk in your family, you can probably squeeze in a mammogram. See what I did there?
So funny.
Squeezing a mammogram even before you're 40. I know I didn't wait. I was 39, which I know isn't like super ahead. But once we realized that my family was not the best at not getting breast cancer,
it's not actually a skill, just as a side note.
Yeah. There's a lot of double negatives there. So it was my third mammogram ever. My second that turned out to be abnormal. So I was not doing great with my abnormal mammograms. And it led to more mammograms, biopsies, and then a cancer diagnosis. And lucky for me, which is there's a lot of confusion here with anger and gratitude and luck and whatever, but we'll use the words everybody likes. So lucky for me, I caught it very, very early. It was stage 0, which means it hadn't really gone anywhere. It was really just like the cancer cells had really just started popping up and killing off the healthy cells. And it was the dead healthy cells that they found, which is amazing because this is the kind of thing that they would not have found not that long ago. And it did result though in a bilateral mastectomy, which is they basically took both of my boobs. And the good news is there's a very, very low chance of me ever getting cancer in my breasts again. So that is great. Riley has been there for both some highs and lows, both like going to meet with the breast cancer surgeon for the first time. And then I would consider a high coming to my house and helping me decorate for fall because I can't lift up things that are more than 5 pounds.
Yeah, that was actually quite fun. And my daughter came and, she'll decorate anything. So
yeah, she was delightful. And so it has been a summer and I imagine you're going to hear me process a lot of this because to be perfectly honest, I can't tell if I'm just completely still in shock or if I'm handling it really well because I've been through a lot and I've put up a lot of support so I know how to handle things. And I think it might be both, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
Um, hopefully this won't become a podcast about breast cancer. But certainly it's going to weave its way in over the next few months, simply because at some point I'm going to be getting another surgery for reconstruction. But I am here if anyone ever has questions about what I've experienced or how I'm feeling or any of those things. But it feels particularly important that our our season is focused on the question, and I want Riley to really I want you to be the one that really explains the season because you were presented with this question first.
Okay.
But it feels particularly important that this season the question is, how is your heart?
Yeah. It's when we conceived of the season, um I could not have anticipated how important it would be to both of us. Like, I just couldn't have understood at that time. I mean, the universe obviously did because it was like, this should be your season, and these are the people you should run into, and all of those things. But when I was asked this question when we were at the Moms 2.0 conference, and someone asked me the question, how is your heart? And it shook me, like legit shook me. I've not, people say that like in passing all the time, right? But this, I stopped, I paused, I was like, oh, wow, insert swear word here. Um, I have no idea. And what does that even mean? And what do I think it means? And how, like there were 8,000 questions that came into my head in addition to the question of how is my heart? And what does that mean for me if I can't answer that with any sort of clarity? Um, and I was actually asked the question on two separate occasions, and now I've heard it like many times all summer long. I've been like watching trashy TV and it's come up. I have been reading books and it's come up. Like it just keeps popping up. So I know like deep down that this is what we're meant to be talking about right now. Um, and what it means, I think, on a very personal level is how is your heart is meant to one cause you to reflect deeply and meaningfully about your internal experience of life, but it's also an external question of what is your community like, right? Like, what is your, and I don't mean just where you live, I mean your personal community, like your support systems, your friends, your family, your religious experiences if you have them, your spirituality. It's a very broad but very deep and meaningful kind of question. And when we started talking about it, things were pretty good for us. I think we were in a really good place, both of us. And now it's not that things are bad now. It's just that, a lot has happened in a very short period of time. And it's a lot to manage and deal with and process and experience. And so going back to that question has even more meaning to me anyway. Because, if you don't know me, then you don't know this, but I have a lot of medical PTSD in my life from people having, emergencies happen and just stress related to medical issues and my kids and my spouse and my family and all kinds of stuff. So when all this came up with Tova, it also like was a very challenging experience for me. And I think when we look at the question of how are you, right? Like it just doesn't go deep enough because at any given moment I could be anything, truthfully. Like in
Yeah.
any second of the day, it shifts. And that's not because I'm unbalanced or like I'm not dealing with things or whatever. It's because I'm a human being with a whole lifetime of experience, right? And all of that comes into play all the time, which feels super overwhelming, but doesn't have to if we stop and process it in this larger, more holistic way that we're going to spend, I don't know, an entire season talking about.
Well, and I think like, how are you? Like, okay, well, today I'm okay. I haven't um I'm not totally wiped out and exhausted yet, although that will come.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't forgotten to take any medicine yet, which yay, I'm getting feeling better to forget it, but I'm not quite there where I can forget it yet. And then I'm
Right.
like, oh no, now I have to stay up later so I can squeeze it. Like, also though, like, I'm not great, like I just had surgery. I'm nervous. I'm feeling very nervous about going back to work because I'm so tired. And I'm like, I don't know how I will actually work. So I'm trying to give myself grace. And I'm nervous about Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and I can feel anger starting to peek its head out. And just in a text that you and I shared yesterday, Riley, where it was like I was finally feeling good about my body, and as a thing, a vessel, and now I'm like, I don't know what to do with you because you betrayed me. But like,
Right.
also, you're healing really well, so like, way to go, body. Like, so it's the how are you is so confusing. How is your heart for me? Very good, thank you. Like the community that I have cultivated is nothing short of amazing and magical. And the people in my life, both people who I have never met, people who I have, I'm dearly close to, we are talking about a wide variety of people in my life who have stepped up in one way or another to support my family, to support my kids, to feed us, which, you know, at first, you're like, well, I'm pretty competent. I can make dinner. Well, let me tell you, by dinner time, I'm very tired. And also, like, someone's like, do you want to make the pasta at your house? And it's like, I would love to, but I can't pick up 5 pounds.
Right.
So I can't boil water. I made ramen for my one son. He's like, remember those noodles we had on vacation? And I was like, the ramen? He's like, yeah, can I have some of those again? So I could do that because it was a little tiny pot. But I roasted tomatoes the other day that were delivered from my community garden from a friend who's taking care of our plot because I'm not taking care of our plot. And I was like, I'm gonna make soup. Great idea. I can put things in the oven. You know what I can't do is once they get in the pot, I can't get them to a blender. I can't actually pick up the pot. like, so I then Amazoned myself a hand blender
An
and then
immersion
put them
blender. I was just
and
thinking that.
yeah, and then put that which I had, but it broke. But anyway, so
Yeah.
like, in many ways, my heart is, I think one of the reasons that I haven't fallen into, to use Anne of Green Gables, the depths of despair
Mhm.
is because of my community and is because of the strength of my heart. And that includes medical professionals who've stepped up. It's including you, Riley, but it's also including like the Reiki healer that I talked to and the cranial sacral therapist. And like, I have been very cognizant of anxiety and making sure that like my body is not carrying more than it can, and so that is almost, if somebody said, how is your heart? I would have been like, solid, like solid, not
Right.
perfect, but doing really well actually. And because I think when you ask that question, it gives you space for sadness or anger or all of these other things that are going to occur in your life like pretty much daily. um And so I think that it is a really interesting question and one that we need to be asking more of ourselves, because I think by asking ourselves this question, it can help prepare us for life, and it helps us live life, I think, more. I'm blanking on the word, but truly or authentically. I know that's one of your favorite words.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and
Um,
and making sure you're really embodying like your values and what's important to you.
right. Uh, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I want us to sort of talk about some of the science behind why this matters, but also like how we're going to go through the season. Like what does this even mean for the season? So, but we're going to take a quick break, everybody, and we will be right back.
Know what I really love to do?
Take baths, go for walks, read, drink margaritas, hike.
Yeah, not what I was referring to. You know, we're recording a commercial right now.
I do, but I'm thinking outside the box, being adaptable.
As I was saying, what I love to do is host our live monthly workshops.
Oh, right. That's what we were talking about. Me too. They are a lot of fun to put together and host every month. And we can bring margaritas, so.
Join us for live conversation as we get a bit deeper into topics near and dear to our hearts. We go through everything from self care to setting boundaries.
We share coaching tips, practical advice, and take questions from the audience. It's a whole lot of fun.
Sign up for our newsletter today at goboldlyinitiative.com/contact to make sure you hear about all the upcoming Go Boldly workshops.
You definitely don't want to miss out. Now, back to that show. Okay, so welcome back to the show. Before the break, we were sort of diving in full bodied into the topic at hand. And I want to just slow us down for a second and focus on like why we ask this question of ourselves and why we think it's a great idea to ask other people this question. And then also, what does it really mean, from a psychological standpoint? What is the science telling us? So why we ask the question is, I mean, I think it's probably self-evident, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. And it is the same reason we think about your body as a holistic being, right? Like you're not a linear individual with one dimension. We have all kinds of dimensions to us. And in order to understand what it means for you to be healthy, happy, to be well, to be living a life of meaning to yourself, then this question is a necessary one to sort of start to look at. You may phrase it differently in your own life, and that's fine. But looking at your whole world as opposed to, well, if I just lose 15 pounds, then I'm going to be happy. Or if I get this promotion, then I'll feel successful, right? It's a much larger view, without losing the smaller pieces of what makes up the whole. Um, so it might be things like, how are you living your values? Are you engaging in your purpose? Are you, thinking about yourself as more than just a physical vessel, roaming the roaming the planet, for lack of a better description, right? How are you thinking about yourself, and how are you thinking about the people around you, and where are your priorities and values showing up in your life? I think that is one of the most important ways to look at this question of how is your heart versus like, how are you today, right? Like we can all give a snapshot of how we are today. And I'm not devaluing that either. It's important to recognize, where you are at any given moment. I just think it's a larger conversation to talk about how your heart is.
Well, and one thing I think that's really hard with the question of how are you is when I ask someone that, I want to know how they actually are.
Right.
But that being said, if we're not particularly close, it's a hard question for them to answer sometimes. Like, well, my grandfather's in hospice, like, but they don't know me well enough. I'm like, oh, hey, how are you? You're like hanging out in front of the school at kid pickup. And like, they might be awful, right? But like, they don't want to get into it and they don't want to tell me and they don't want to deal with it, and that's okay. Like they don't have to, but also it means that I'm probably not going to get an honest answer of how are you, unless the question is like on the surface, how are you functioning as a, like, how are you like physically functioning? It's like, well, I made it to school pickup, so that seems good. And
Success.
you know and whereas I think you could say, how is your heart? And I mean, once somebody gets over the like, wait, what did you just ask me?
Right.
They can answer that almost more truthfully with less information. Like
Yeah.
you can say, well, I'm carrying a lot today, or my heart is good. We're going through some stuff, and or whatever the case might be. And I feel like it's just a way to answer a truer question, but you almost can do it without getting into the weeds of like what's actually happening in your life.
Yeah, I think it's super important to recognize that asking the question, how is your heart, requires you to be vulnerable, and
Yeah.
answering the question requires you to be vulnerable, which is going to create a deeper connection between the people having the conversation, right? Now, I'm not saying that, like, in the grocery line, you're going to ask the lady you don't know, how is your heart? And you're suddenly going to become best friends. I'm suggesting that if you are seeking connection, if you are seeking a way to feel like you are a part of something bigger than just your own micro universe, this is a great way to do it, right? Like, this is a great way to allow yourself to be vulnerable, to allow yourself to be open. I mean, when I think about asking somebody this question, I get uncomfortable. Like,
Yes.
I'm legitimately uncomfortable. It like physically makes me go, oh, I don't know. And it feels hard. Like, it feels like a really hard thing to do because I'm afraid of, somebody going, what the hell? Why are you asking me that? Or, like looking at me like I'm crazy, because it's a deep question to ask people. Um, but it also, and we've talked about this at length in other scenarios, it also allows the other person to be vulnerable. And if you want people to be vulnerable with you, you have to be vulnerable with them. And that's what this does in a very, very clear kind of way, because you don't ask somebody that question if you're not interested in the answer, right? You don't ask them if you're not interested in the connection.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it makes you feel uncomfortable to ask. And yet, if you envision someone asking it to you, it's almost like, oh my gosh, this person really cares how I'm doing.
Yeah.
Like, it's almost like, oh, this person wants to know me. This person cares about me. Like, there's a little thrill there. Like, whereas,
Yeah.
so there you can feel in your body sort of the benefits of the vulnerability if you're willing to be vulnerable.
Right.
And I think, if we move a little farther into some of the science, which you did the research for this, so I'll leave to you, but this concept of holistic health, right? And this concept of being able to feel how your body is responding to things. And there's books out there. There's The Body Keeps Score there, which I am slowly getting through, not because it's not a wonderful book, because it's just a lot of feeling and
Yeah.
information.
Yeah.
um, and then there is another book, The Body Is Not an Apology, which is I would recommend, if you haven't listened to it or read it, that you read it. It is a phenomenal book. And the Body Is Not an Apology is talks about, really, and I'm blanking on words today, but extreme is not the right word, but an extreme love of your body and acceptance of your body.
Right.
And I think it is so important when we look at our bodies, and we recognize, people will be like, well, it's in his head, as if your head is not part of your body, as if you can separate anxiety in your head with anxiety in your body. Like, it is the most ridiculous thing that we talk about. And yet, recognizing that if you believe that you have a soul, right, and how your soul takes care of your body. And I even had, when I was talking to the woman who I do Reiki with, and she was talking, and I was saying, to a certain extent, I feel alone, because I am technically, like, I can have all the friends and community and amazing people in the world. And so on one hand, I feel very not alone, but on the other hand, like, I'm just sitting here by myself. And she said, that's only if you look at your body and your mind, your body and your soul as the same thing. If you look at it as two things that can work together, you're not by yourself. You're like with your body. And I was like, well, that is a lot of woo for me, but also comforting
Yeah.
and an interesting way. Like, on one hand, it's all one thing, and on the other hand, it's not. And it's how it relates to yourself and how it works together. And so I don't think we can separate our bodies and our minds. I think they're basically the same thing. And I think it's really important that we learn about ourselves and learn about how we handle physical traumas and emotional traumas and how they affect each other. And I don't mean trauma in the like clinical word. I mean like you had vertigo. Like let's not talk about the big, C. Like you had vertigo last week. That I've had it before. It is exhausting. It is overwhelming. It is demoralizing. It is frustrating. You are dizzy. You can't do anything. It's super annoying. And yet, I know from what you have described and what I remember, it feels like it's just in your head. Like,
Right.
how are you so debilitated by just being dizzy?
Right.
Like, it seems so absurd, and yet it's not. And it affects all of these other things. And, you know, as I've recovered from surgery, not to get too graphic, but I had drains. They're gross. Happy to talk to you about them separately. But every time one came out, it was like, oh, like my body could take a deeper breath.
Yeah.
And I don't even think I knew how much they bothered me. I knew how much it really bothered me, but I don't think I really understood how much it was bothering me. So I think that, one thing that we have to remember, and I was telling the story about like having the drains removed, is you get a cold, you get vertigo, you get cancer, whatever it is. My son gets allergies, and instead of telling me that his eyes itch, he becomes a, devil child from a 70s like horror film. And you're just like, buddy, do you need some Claritin? And
Right.
he's like, I hate everyone. And you're like, here's some Benadryl. And he's like, they're like friends that feel like family. And you're just like, buddy. And so I think that, he's my favorite example of how the
Yeah.
body and mind work when
It is amazing. I watched it in action. It was
yeah,
fantastic.
you're like, what just
Whoa.
happened? But I think that that's what happens when you're not in tune with how your I know I keep saying body and mind are the same thing, and I'm like, no, but we're going to talk about how the body and mind are connected. But like when your physical being is feeling one thing, it is very hard for that not to affect your mental being.
And vice versa.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
Yes. I think a lot of times um, things can manifest in aches and pains. And how often will you say it's in their head?
Oh my
Well,
God.
okay, but that doesn't mean their back doesn't hurt.
Right. No, we have this conversation a lot in my house. And the idea that your mental and physical health are not connected is just outrageous at this point. Like there's so much science telling us that they are, right? That they are intricately connected, that you will have physical symptoms of emotional distress. You will have emotional symptoms from physical distress. There's not just science, there's anecdotes, there's our lived experiences. To pretend like that's not real at this point is just outrageous. Like that's silly. Um, and we'll
And
talk
yet
about it more. We
people
will.
do.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, people do. And of course, in like, toxic culture, it's a constant like, we'll just suck it up and live with it. And or, in the dismissal of women's pain because, we're hysterical, telling us things like, well, it's probably just, aging. Okay, but it's still awful. Like we need to fix it. Right, like these things are just I don't know, I'm obviously getting up on my soapbox here and getting frustrated because I take this very personally from personal experience. But the entirety of your being is connected and intertwined and intricately woven together, and that is your mind, your body, your spirit, your soul, whatever you want to call it, your connection to the universe. All of those things are connected, and to pretend like they're not is denying a piece of our own humanity, in my opinion. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
I'm making big statements today.
no, I mean, I think you are so right. And I think it's right there. It's right there on the edge of it really being embraced by mainstream culture.
Yeah.
And we're going to take a quick break. When we come right back, I'm going to tell you what I mean. So we will be right back.
In case you didn't already know, we love talking.
True story. More than simply talking, We love researching, prepping, and bringing this podcast to life.
We launched We Go Boldly with the goal of reaching people dealing with the kinds of questions and concerns that we also face.
Things like how to hear my inner voice, how to make sure my habits are worth it and stick, how do I feel my feelings and still manage to function.
After years of personal work and lots of trial and error, we realized we have a lot to share on these topics.
Now we've been broadcasting for over a year and we are proud of our podcast.
And to no one's surprise, we still have a lot to say and talk about.
We sure do. We need your help to keep going. Every episode takes time and money to create, and we would love your support.
So, if you like what we are doing, please support us by joining our Patreon community and becoming a monthly subscriber.
Join our Patreon community today at patreon.com/wegoboldly. We are so grateful to all of our supporters. Now, back to the show. Okay, so welcome back. Riley got a text from me over the summer when I was watching a baseball game, and I was like, oh my gosh, they're talking about grounding on a baseball game. And right, do you remember that?
Yeah,
I was like
I do.
so excited.
It was
so
fantastic.
One of the Orioles, Go Birds, baseball players was like for whatever reason didn't have shoes on like to start the game, or he like had to come out for like a pre-game photo op or something and didn't have shoes on, and then he was like walking around in the grass, and then he ran back in and he had this phenomenal game. And the announcers were asking him afterwards if like maybe he'll do that every game, but they made a comment about how, they say you can go outside and it's a great grounding technique to put your bare feet in the grass. And I was like, what?
Right.
I mean, I know that, that.
Yeah.
But I think it is, it's right there. Like I have so many vagus nerve books that I have not read that I need to read. But there's so much, the part of the book Burnout that I love the most was looking at the science of truly healing your body by paying attention to your stress cycles. And, it is so important that when we are addressing our physical aches and pains, and this is not like, we're not pretending to be doctors, but this is us saying, if you have physical aches and pains, something's wrong. It's going to affect your mind. And there have been times where I have been in my nervous system has just been a disaster in really intense times of trauma, which I have to say could be why I am sort of handling this wellish, which is that I've worked really hard on trying to keep my nervous system as chill as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But where my body has been like, situation is not okay. This is not right. This is not okay. And my mind's like, it's fine. Everything's fine. And my body's like sounding the alarm. And so it can go both ways. And I think it's just really important that we do this whole, you wrote in the outline, whole human analysis. And I love that because it is looking at everything. And this season is going to have a lot of twists and turns because it's not, you might be like, okay, but what are you guys going to talk about next week? Like,
right.
We're going to be talking about a variety of things that we think go into answering, how is your heart?
Right. And it is, I mean, I think essentially our plan is to do a whole human analysis, right? That comes with looking at mental health, looking at social experiences and social behaviors, talking about physical health, talking about trauma and vulnerability, about letting go, about family systems, and about this concept that both of us really enjoy and have talked about before on the show, but the idea of no longer seeking balance, like we're not looking for a work-life balance because one, it doesn't exist. And two, how does anyone do that? But we're talking about seeking harmony. And if you think about harmony in terms of music, like if you think about the musicality of harmony, right? It's when it all comes together and maybe it's not all at the same place and it's not all at the same pitch or tone or whatever, but it's harmonizing and it feels good and we like it, right? Like that's what we want to seek is harmony in our lives because that seems attainable, right? Like that seems like something we can get to versus balance where I'm like, it's never going to be completely balanced. It's never going to be 50% family and 50% work, right? Or whatever the balance actually is, because I don't even know.
Right.
But we can harmonize it, right? Like we can make it work. It's like, when people tell you to go on some crazy restrictive diet and you're like, oh, that's not going to work. What's going to work? Harmonizing your diet, right? Like you don't have to eat exactly from the 3 food groups every single meal. You just need to harmonize it so that it's healthy.
Well, and it's about listening to your body and figuring out what feels good and what
Right.
doesn't feel good. And now you're saying balance, and because you and I have worked so hard on talking about harmony. And when I think of balance now, I think of actual balancing. And I
Right.
had just read something that kids and adults, I would imagine, who struggle with like anxiety and regulation and like body regulation, um, balancing on things and being forced to focus on balancing on something can help regulate their body
Right.
because like everything's going to balancing. And it's so funny that I saw this. Now we're talking about balancing, but then the other night I have this thing that you balance on that I have gotten to help myself when I've sprained my ankles.
Mm-hmm.
And my kids have now brought it out and now they're doing it every night and practicing balancing. And I'm like, well, okay, this is an interesting technique that you have just created on your own for
Right.
self-regulation.
Fantastic.
Look at that.
Um, yeah, no, I love when that happens. That makes me so happy. It's like when my kid like used to go outside and roll around in the grass all the time when she was stressed out. Like she's just like,
I
oh,
mean,
okay,
my
I
son
guess
used to hug a tree.
right.
So,
Like I guess you're just gonna go ground yourself. I'll just stay here.
yeah.
Um, it's fantastic. But yeah, so we're going to talk about all that stuff throughout the season. If there's some aspect of this question that you all are interested in us exploring, we're happy to do the research. So let us know if you think we missed something. Um, we're always open to suggestions. We may not always take them, but we're open to listening to them. Um, but yeah, I did, as we talked about earlier, and I know we need to wrap up, but I wanted to just mention what is known as holism in psychology. And this is like the the definition is the basic principle of holism is that people are more than simply the sum of their parts. In order to understand how people think, the holistic perspective stresses that you need to do more than simply focus on how each individual component functions in isolation. Instead, psychologists who take this approach believe that it is more important to look at how all the parts work together. Right. So again, I mean, I think that's a self-evident definition, but just to raise the idea that when we're talking about health, we need to talk about the whole picture, right? And it's not just what's going on inside your body, not just what's going on inside your home. It's your whole the universe you're living in, whatever that looks
Yeah.
like is a part of that conversation.
Well,
Um,
I was it just isn't, not to interrupt you,
no, no, go.
but I was talking to a friend who recently went back to, she's a teacher, right? So she
Mhm.
just started her class again. And she had a summer that I would not trade for anything. Um, her husband asked for a divorce, and then he changed his mind, and then he asked again, and it's the whole thing. It's been a summer. I mean, it certainly put in perspective what I'm going through now and what I used to be going through, and I'm like, oh, I'll take this, thank you.
Yeah.
Um, Even with the grossness and the surgery, but anyway, she is now on her own with her kids, and she's dealing with a lot. It's certainly not calm. They're not divorced yet. It's very stressful. She has a lot of stress in front of us. But she told me the other day, she goes, the first day back to school was one of the calmest days I've had. Like normally I'm frantic and I'm frenetic and I'm just running around, and it was calm. And I said, I wonder how much of that has to do with your home is calm. Like, even though you're dealing with all of the stress, it's outside of your home. Your home is actually a place to be calm now. And so I think it is just fascinating because there's so much that happens in our lives that we don't recognize how it intertwines with each other. And she would not describe her life right now as calm. It's a mess. I mean, it's just a mess. but she has peace in her actual home that she hasn't had for years.
Right.
And so I think that this is going to be an interesting conversation we have. And it is really important for us to be able to identify what is out of harmony. I was figuring out the best way to say that, but what isn't not even in alignment, but what is not in harmony with everything else in our lives.
Yeah.
And how we can get it there.
Where is that like dissonant noise coming from, right? Like,
Yes.
what is the thing that you're hearing off in the distance and you're going, that doesn't feel good, right? Like that doesn't feel right in my life. And I don't mean doesn't feel good like cancer doesn't feel good. Like you can't have cancer and be like, no, thank you. Right. Like that just
by the way, that's one of the weirder things about cancer, right? Because I caught it so early that I didn't feel the cancer.
Right.
And so that's something that's totally causing me.
Right.
Like, it was the healing that was the thing that's saving my life that caused the pain. It's very confusing.
Yeah, yes. That is confusing. Yes. but what I mean is, maybe there's a person in your life who is just no longer fits with where you see your life going, right? And they're causing that sort of uncomfortable noise in the background, or maybe it's a job or a hobby or something you volunteer for, or, I don't know, maybe it's the clothes you're wearing. Who knows what it is? But we all know when that thing feels bad, right? Like it's just, you feel it and you're like, something doesn't feel right. And so starting to recognize what those things are, and then giving yourself permission to do something about it, to change it, is enormous, right? Because that is super hard. And I think I'm just thinking out loud, I'm going to add that actually to our list of topics we're going to come to.
Well, I was going to say, did you really think we were going to get through an entire episode without mentioning boundaries?
No, I never do. Like I barely get through a day without mentioning boundaries. So, and of course, just to add on to that, it's also, very key to understanding your inner voice is being able to ask the question, how is your heart? And also answer it. Right. So we don't really have homework for this first episode, but I will say that if you are open to it, give it a try this week. Ask somebody, how is your heart? Give yourself the grace and space and whatever you want to call it to do the hard thing and ask the uncomfortable question. Maybe start with somebody you're like more comfortable with than others, and give it a chance. And, ask yourself the question, more importantly right now is, ask yourself, how is my heart? Like what is resonating with me right now? And then finally, just a reminder, we have our weekly women's circle. We're actually going to change the time of that very soon. So if you've looked in the past and the time doesn't work for you, stay tuned because we'll be changing that. And maybe it will work for you now. And we might be starting a second group as well. So we would love to have you guys join us. It's a lot of fun. It's very, I don't know, it's a very sort of calming, peaceful way to get through your week, is to know you have that hour set aside just for your own, personal self-care time. So we would 100%. Love to have you join us.
Yeah. And we'll be back next week talking more about the body of it all. Like your physical being.
Yes. All right. Well, until then, everyone have a fantastic week, and we will be back here next Wednesday. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much for listening to We Go Boldly podcast. We know you're busy and we love spending time with you.
If you enjoyed this week's episode, let us know. Head to Apple Podcasts right now to rate and review our show. While you're there, be sure to click that subscribe button.
Want more us time? Follow us on all the socials at Go Boldly Together.
Want even more us time? As in all the coaching pizzazz. Find us at goboldlyinitiative.com for all the info.
We will be back with more excitement, research, and deep thoughts next week.
Until then, keep on being the bold, brave, amazing people we know you already are.